Howdy, my name's Chris and today I'm happy to present to you a review of this interesting little Zeiss lens for Sony's full-frame E-mount mirrorless cameras, the Batis 25mm f2. It's an autofocus lens with a useful, very wide angle and a moderately bright aperture of f2 for letting in a decent amount of light and offering somewhat out of focus backgrounds. It costs a huge $1,300 or a little over £900 here in the UK, expensive, but at least this thing has autofocus, so if its image quality is good enough then it could offer some value. Zeiss's Batis lenses are very usable and nicely designed overall, and this one is no exception. Its aesthetic design is unusually corpulent, offering quite a rotund profile. For all my viewers for whom English is not their first language, and I know there are a few of you, I'm saying it's fat. Although it's made of metal, it's not really very heavy, weighing 335 grams, well under a pound. It's based on a metal lens mount with rather a thin weather sealing gasket in that distinctive Zeiss blue colour. Then we get a nicely rubberized manual focus ring which turns very smoothly and feels nice to touch. There's even a display which can tell you your focus distance, a bit of a gimmick but still quite cool looking. If the display doesn't seem to work for you at first, then set your camera to manual focus and turn the focus ring anti-clockwise for a while, which will get you into its settings, where you can choose for it to be on all the time, only on when manual focusing, or off altogether. When you change focus, the lens suffers from clear focus breathing, zooming in as you focus more closely. The lens's autofocus motor is quick, silent and accurate. As you can see here, it works very well. It will probably work a little quicker again on a newer camera body than this one. Its filter thread size is 67mm and it comes with a completely plastic but quite shapely lens hood. It does not have image stabilization. Overall, it doesn't feel the same as Zeiss's most expensive lenses, but its build quality is very lovely nonetheless. Its unusual shape might turn a few heads too. Now let's take a look at image quality, which is much more important. I'm going to start by testing it on a full frame camera, my 42MP Sony a7R II. In the middle of the image at f2, sharpness and contrast are just good, not great, and a little colour fringing on contrasting edges is visible. The good news though is that the corner image quality is no worse, still managing to look reasonably sharp, which is good to see on such a wide angle lens. Stop down to f2.8 for more brightness and a little more contrast, but no extra sharpness. Back in the middle though, we do see better sharpness now and no more colour fringing. Stop down to f4 for another little boost in sharpness in the middle and a slightly more subtle boost in sharpness in the corners. The corners stay this sharp down to f11. Stop down to f16 or darker and softness begins to emerge because, well, you know why, diffraction. Overall, on a full frame camera, I was left with slightly mixed feelings by this lens. I did wish it was sharper at f2, but then again, at least its corner image quality is as good as its quality in the middle, which is important for a wide angle optic. I think that anyone shooting with a 24MP camera will be delighted with the lens's image quality overall, but 42MP shooters or higher will only be satisfied. Let's see how the lens copes on an APS-C camera now, my little 24MP Sony a5100. That APS-C sensor is a little more demanding than the 42MP full frame one, and accordingly we see a little more softness in the middle now at f2 with slightly more noticeable colour fringing. But again, the good news is that the image corners don't look any worse, at least. Here's f2.8 where the corners look just a tiny bit sharper and cleaner, and the middle looks pretty good. Stop down to f4 and the middle now looks great, and the corners look very nice also. Again, the image quality stays this sharp down to f11, and if you stop down darker than that, then softness ensues. So it's a similar performance on APS-C, just good enough at the brightest aperture of f2, but very good when stopped down a little. Alright, let's move on and look at distortion and vignetting on a full frame camera. These pictures are taken with in-camera corrections turned off. It's certainly good news for distortion here, there's barely any at all. At f2, vignetting is rather heavy though. At f2.8, f4 and f5.6 it only goes away quite gradually, so you'd better leave those corrections turned on. Now onto close-up image quality. With a minimum focus distance of 20 centimeters, the lens can get you really close to your subject. At those close distances, the image is a little softer at f2 with slightly more pronounced colour fringing. f2.8 looks a lot better and f4 is very sharp. How does this lens work against bright lights? That's an important question for a wide-angle optic which could be catching the sun here and there in your pictures. The lens performs just about on the good side of average. Some flaring is clearly visible, but it's fairly transparent and not too heavy. While we're working in the dark, let's take a look at coma levels now. At f2, bright points of light in your image corners see some glaring, but surprisingly little coma smearing. If you want to see some decent sun stars here, you'll have to stop down to f5.6 or f8, and there they make a gentle appearance. Let's take a look at this lens's bokeh. With its maximum aperture of f2, shooting close up can get you some generously out of focus backgrounds, and they always looked lovely and soft in all my sample images, albeit with some slightly blue highlighting on especially bright points of light. Finally, longitudinal chromatic aberration. That is a real problem for this lens, unfortunately. We see some huge colour fringing before and after the plane of focus at f2 on contrasting edges. f2.8 is almost as bad, but at f4 it begins to clear up, and at f5.6 it finally goes away. So then, overall, 24, or in this case 25mm lenses with at least a reasonably bright maximum aperture seem to be difficult to design, and I don't think I've ever come across an incredibly sharp one at any price on any system, so the fact that this lens is not perfectly sharp at f2 doesn't necessarily mean it's not competitive, even if I was hoping for a bit more at this very high price point. As I mentioned before, users of 24 megapixel full frame cameras will be delighted with its image quality, I think, but 42 megapixel shooters will only be satisfied. Sharpness issues aside though, and forgetting its issues with colour fringing, it certainly is a good enough lens optically, and in terms of its build quality it gets nice pictures. It just about misses on my recommendation, because I really don't think it's worth as much as $1,300 US, and value for money is something I think is very important. But I'm sure those who do buy it will be reasonably happy, as it can admittedly take some very nice images, and that focal length and reasonably bright aperture are useful.